Council Transportation Committee for Monday, October 14, 2019. Our first item our business or item is to approve the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Well, agenda is approved. Next, we move on to approval of the minutes from the September 23rd, 2019 committee meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions to the minutes? Not, entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the minutes are approved. Next, we move on to reports. We have MTS Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, committee members, a couple updates today. The first thing you'll notice in the consent agenda, the first two items, I just thought I'd highlight something there. These would have been normally routine items but because this year we were notified by Federal Highway that they'll be delaying their approval of the TIP by a few months. And they are doing that because they're putting some extra, not just in the metro area, but statewide, reviewing the TIP with some extra processes. So the normal schedule for approving the next TIP is being delayed. The impact of that is if there's some projects that were going to go under construction during that time frame that weren't in last year's TIP, they couldn't be let unless we have them in an active TIP. So we're working with MnDOT and amending a lot of the current TIP with these items. And so they're projects that are just fine. It's nothing that is happening on either MnDOT or Met Council for this approval. It's just the Federal Highway is kind of late in the game, informed us that they're delaying the approval of that TIP overall. And so you're going to start to see, this is the first of probably a few that you'll see coming through over the next couple months until they sign off on that TIP that the council approved on September 25th. So our goal is to make sure that all these projects stay on schedule, and that's why we're doing these amendments to the existing and the future TIP. So another update, next Monday and Tuesday we are hosting for the House and Senate and their staff Metro Mobility 101. They've been in the past year we were able to get Metro Mobility as a separate budget. We've had several legislative actions come through for data sharing and other items, and they just felt that they would like a good overview and have the chance to go see a Metro Mobility garage, see dispatch. And so we've extended that invite for a training session that we did for governor's staff also to the transportation committees and anybody else that's interested. And I think we have between 30 and 40 signed up between the 2 days. So hopefully that'll help us as we go into the next session or any future years, have a good understanding and kind of walk on a bus and things like that you've had that kind of in your orientation here. We've been able to do that, but give that to them also. So that is next week. And then just some good news that we heard today on the state's Toward Zero Death Initiative, which is that we're all participating in and try to drive the fatalities on the transportation system down to zero. We received some updates today about how 2019 is going, and there have been 92 fatalities this year in the metro area. 92 too many, but compared to last year, there was 122 at this point last year. So almost a 30% reduction compared to last year. Trends on this can go up and down, but I think last few years it's been slowly creeping up rather than going down, and so we see this as a positive sign that this is a good year on the transportation system, and that's for highways, that's for all transportation related incidents. So just thought I'd update you on that number. With that, Madam Chair, that concludes my report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you remind me about the data sharing request that was that approved last year? And then
Madam
how
Chair,
do you see that?
That was approved this last session, and we've been working with DHS trying to get that up and running. We're at the point where we're trying to get an agreement with DHS to allow us to share data, but we now have the authority to do that. So we're hoping to have that implemented as soon as we can have this agreement with them and start sharing and figure that out. And we've always said that first we need to share the data and understand it, then we'll be able to understand if we're able to recapture federal money for that. So we're a few steps away from that ultimate answer about what that will be for impact. But we now have authority to do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from council members? All right, thank you. We'll move on to, we've got COO Vince Pellegrin from Metro Transit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Vince Pellegrin. I'm pinch hitting today for General Manager Koistra. I have a few items here I'd like to report. The Twins ridership is the highest since 2012. The ridership at Target Field reached its highest level since 2012. More than 717,000 rides were provided to and from Target Field this year, which is a 37% increase from 2018. Biggest gains were seen on Metro Green Line, where ridership increased 58%. The increase reflects stronger attendance at Target Field, and Target Field attendance was up more than 15%. Postseason hopes are now being directed towards Minnesota United, which will host a first-round playoff at Allianz Field on Sunday, October 20th. The match against Los Angeles begins at 7:30 p.m. Bus lanes are having a positive effect on reliability. Dedicated bus lanes have been in use for several weeks on two busy Minneapolis corridors, improving travel times and reliability. Bus lanes are located on Chicago and Hennepin Avenues, where buses were frequently slowed by congestion. Travel times in the sections of Hennepin Avenue where the bus lanes were added have been cut by 12%. Travel times in roughly 2 block stretch of Chicago Avenue with bus lanes have been reduced by 40%. The savings mean trips are fewer minutes shorter and than they used to be. Data shows that the variation in travel time while using the bus lanes is significantly improved. This fall, bus lanes are expected to be added to a portion of Nicollet Avenue between Franklin Avenue and Lake Street. The bus lane additions are being pursued in partnership with the City of Minneapolis. Transit Center updates. Passenger waiting area in the Mall of America Transit Center is opened today as a $25 million renovation of that facility. The new indoor waiting facility provides more direct access to the mall as well as family restroom, better lighting. Spaces have been created for operators who are on breaks and for transit police. A grand opening of the facility will be held later this year. Attention is now turning to Northtown Transit Center in Blaine, where we'll be relocating our existing facility due to mall owner redevelopment plans. To inform the new transit center design, neighbors will be invited to 2 open houses next week. Those open houses will be held on Wednesday, October 23rd from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Spring Lake Park City Hall, and on Thursday, October 24th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Northtown Mall Community Room in Blaine. I'd like to report we're kind of holding our own. We remain 90 operators down from our ideal. We've had some strong recent classes, and we remain optimistic, trying to gain some on that. Though plans are still in development, we are aiming to host a one-day hiring event where applicants could interview, test, receive conditional job offer in the same day. Something we haven't tried. This is something that Las Vegas police have had very good success with. So. Pending a background check and drug screening, tentative date is Saturday, December 7th. Still working on a venue. If successful, this could become a model, and we turn to this more regularly in the future. Thank you, and I can stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilmember Zarin.
Would you mind giving me the date again on that?
On
the operator, the event?
Oh, the operator, the hiring event?
Hiring event, yeah.
We're looking at Saturday, December 7th.
December 7th.
Right. It's our first sort of experiment with a application, background check, and those people will have a tentative job offer before they leave, pending a drug screen and background, yeah. So something new we're trying to enhance our ability to hire bus operators.
Perhaps send out information once you have the date in place firmed
Yeah.
down, and we can get some information out to our networks too, and maybe post things.
We can do that. Once we firm that up, we'll certainly get that information out.
That'd be great. Thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. Is there a way at some point, maybe too soon now, but to see if there's increased ridership where there are dedicated bus lanes with the reduced travel time?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummings, I don't have the ridership numbers, but just anecdotally, I'm hearing good things about ridership on those lines. And so we can get those numbers.
And we also get quarterly ridership reports, so if maybe just refer back, we would like to focus on
Yeah,
that part just to see some changes.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, we've also enhanced the service there. We're trying to get articulated buses on some of those routes to have a little more capacity, to try and do exactly what you're talking about, is, and to enhance the ridership.
Sure. So,
Follow up. Councilmember Cummings?
so when we get the quarterly report, will it separate out the information according to the dedicated bus lanes? So we can sort of analyze that.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, we can add that. We always try to highlight a few of the changes that are from the report or anything new and what has been impact, so I refer back to staff that they should highlight that in the next quarterly, or the quarterly that would reflect these changes.
Right. Thank you.
All right, any other questions from council members? All right, thank you. Next, we are on to our consent agenda. We have 4 items on consent tonight. Does anyone care to make a motion to approve the items on consent?
So moved.
Motion? Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the consent items are passed. Next, we move to our first non-consent item. First one is 2019-259, which is a joint committee item, 2019 third quarter capital amendment. We have Mr. Petrie here.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Ed Petrie, Metro Transit Finance.
Nick Hendrickson, Budget Manager, MTS.
And Nick and I are here to present the third quarter amendment for both our operating and capital amendments. I will go through the Metro Transit portion first, both operating and capital, or capital and operating, I should say, answer any questions. And then I will then turn it over to Nick to go over MTS on. So let's move forward. As always, you have the business item in front of you. You also have the large sheet. You have it on your tablets, but it's a large sheet which shows the proposed projects that we're recommending for change this evening. As always, it shows the projects. It shows what's currently authorized, what we're proposing to change, and what the final authorization would be after the change. And then we then break it down between how much would spend out in 2019 and then how much we'll spend out in the multi-years for that proportion of the amendment. The amendment this evening for Metro Transit on the capital side includes a number of projects that were in the authorized capital program, the CIP that the council adopted back last December. Money's now become available, so we're now recommending those projects to move forward. I will go through a couple. There's a couple projects that were not in the CIP that I'll address first, and then I'll kind of talk about a few of the other projects. The first one is the Beltline Boulevard Station. It's the very first project. We're going to recognize $6.4 million in CMAQ funds for the construction of the Beltline Boulevard Station Park and Ride. It's a 268 space facility. This is a project that we're working with the city of St. Louis Park. It's outside of the Southwest project. It is a St. Louis Park project. The reason we are recognizing it through our CIP is it's a grant. It's a CMAQ grant that comes to the council that is then passed through to St. Louis Park. So we have to do then a subrecipient agreement with the council and St. Louis Park, because how the federal government looks at it is the fact is that the recipient of the funds comes to the Metropolitan Council as the MPO. We then either spend the money or we pass it on to another agency. We then have the federal responsibility to monitor how those funds are being expended. So then we set up a subrecipient agreement between us, the council, and St. Louis Park, so we can then monitor how the monies are being spent. When St. Louis Park then when they spend funds, they will then send the invoice to the council along with supporting documentation. We will then review it. My finance department will then review it to make sure that they have followed all the federal guidelines before we pull the federal funds in. So that's one of the responsibilities that the FTA puts upon the council when you do a subrecipient agreement. And with this agreement then too, the match of this is $1.6 million. That match will then be provided by St. Louis Park. The next item is an item that we actually talked about when we did the capital presentation last Wednesday night, I believe it was, at the council. We talked about an adjustment that we would recommend making to the bus and rail maintenance improvement project. It's recommended to move $10 million worth of motor vehicle sales tax from operations into the capital projects. As a result, as Mr. Pelgan made a comment earlier this evening, we're about 90 operators short. As a result of being under so many operators this year, we're forecasting around between a $10 and $11 million surplus in bus operations on Metro Transit. One-time savings, these are funds that are flexible funds that can be used either on operating or capital. And as we talked about in our capital presentation last Wednesday night, we do have a significant rail maintenance need on the capital side to maintain our rail assets in a state of good repair. We feel that this is a very prudent use of those one-time monies to bring them in and to use them on rail maintenance. The next item is a minor adjustment on the Haywood expansion project. At the last capital amendment, we brought in an additional $10 million so we could then fully fund at that point what we needed for the new Minneapolis bus garage. One of the funds that we brought in was $1,650,000, which was funding from the sale of our former police facility, police headquarters. When the actual funds came in, they were $3,782 less than what we had brought through the capital amendment, so I'm just doing an administrative adjustment to equal the actual proceeds. The next item is we have support equipment and non-revenue vehicles that we're recognizing $1.8 million for the purchase of our non-revenue fleet, police vehicles, and non-revenue types of equipment. Bringing in $1.7 million to improve for the Rosedale Transit Center for our customers and expand the layover capacity for our buses at Rosedale. And then there's just a few other projects within that we're bringing in, small projects that as money has become available, we're moving those forward. So with that, Madam Chair, committee members, that is the portion for the Metro Transit portion of the capital amendment. I would stand for any questions before I move to operating.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the bus and rail maintenance improvements and the $10 million, if that $10 million savings had not happened, would we be doing a smaller project? Would these be deferred, or would there be funding from other sources, or what would have happened?
Madam Chair, committee members, one of the things that we discussed last Wednesday night, and also Mr. Cloister, I believe, also explained too, we have a very large rail maintenance program in our CIP. The first 3 years of that program we have funded.
Mm-hmm.
The last 3 years of that program we don't have fully funded yet. So we still have the needs. This $10 million would go towards fulfilling that need, but we're still going to need additional money to fulfill that program, whether it's from our funding partners from the local side, whether it's from the state, or some other source of funds, or from the feds. But this money will then go towards fulfilling part of that need. And did I answer your question, hopefully?
Yeah, I think I get it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And then I'll proceed then on the operating side. On the operating side for Metro Transit, there are two adjustments that were being made. First of all, one is for $124,500. It's on the North Star state appropriation. When we got the final state appropriations in, we had to slightly adjust what was proceeded or what was appropriated over to North Star. So we're making that $124,000 adjustment. And then the other adjustment is the $10 million with the motor vehicle sales tax that we have previously discussed. So with that, Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions on operating for Metro Transit.
Thank you. Any questions from council members? All right, we'll move on to Nick. Thank you.
Madam Chair and committee members, MTS is requesting to bring into the authorized capital program just under $500,000 in RTC for technology-related projects. Two of these projects need additional RTC funds to complete the purchase of technology equipment on the buses. The third project is a camera pilot project that will evaluate several different camera systems to determine which system meets the overall needs of the service before entering into a contract to upgrade the camera system. As mentioned in previous budget amendments, most of our amendments routinely include administrative adjustments. These are adjustments where the council has awarded budget authority to a parent category, and we have made adjustments within that category. So we share these actions with you for transparency. In the second quarter budget amendment, the council brought in suburban transit providers' federal formula earnings in the form of RTC into the authorized capital program. These funds were placed in an undesignated project and then are moved into specific projects as the suburban providers identify them. This amendment includes projects from Plymouth and MBTA. MTS is also closing one project. MBTA has indicated there's no longer a need for this project, and the remaining funds have been swept back to their undesignated account for future use. And so at this time, I can pause for any questions.
All right, any questions from council members? All right, go ahead.
On the operating side, this amendment takes two actions. in the MTS operating budget. First, it will increase state appropriations for Metro Mobility by $124,500. This amendment will reflect the legislative base appropriation and adjust state fiscal year state appropriations to match actual amounts. Second, this amendment is requesting to increase suburban transit providers' pass-through operating revenues and expenses by $140,000 to recognize federal grant income. MBTA was awarded a CMAQ grant through the regional solicitation for the 169 Express service, and the Met Council is a direct recipient of this grant, and the funds have been sub-granted out to MBTA as a pass-through grant. So this amendment demonstrates commitment towards asset preservation and supports the Thrive outcome of stewardship by assessing future needs, responsible planning, and management of financial resources for Metro Transit and the Metropolitan Transportation Services. So our proposed action tonight is that you authorize the 2019 third quarter budget amendment as indicated and in accordance with the attached tables. And thank you, and I'll happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilmember Zern.
I'm just, I think there was something here that was, Madam Chair, sorry, on page 2 of the business item, the new North Star job table project. Could we talk about that, or is that later in our business item?
Madam Chair, committee members, that is one of the projects. That was one of the smaller projects I did not address, but this is bringing in an additional $150,000 for the North Star drop table. Due to some additional, I believe that they had talked about previously, I believe there's an amendment coming through this evening for a change within the scope of that project due to some additional costs that they're incurring due to some large rocks and some water and those types of items. This is bringing in an additional $150,000 for that project.
Okay, Madam Chair, my question is around, okay, we've got 150,000 on this item, and then we have another item on the same, another business item on the same project. How do those two work together? Can you give me an explanation of
Yes.
why we have two items there?
Madam Chair, committee members, first of all, the project has already had funding authorized by the council. This is bringing in an additional $150,000 because they're looking at what the additional costs that they are going to incur on the current contract. This is bringing in an additional $150,000 to cover the costs. So the reason this is coming forward is we have to bring the additional money in before you can authorize the amendment to the contract.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions? All right, if not, I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2019-259.
Make a motion to approve.
A motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Thank you. Next, we're on to business item 2019-269, which is 2020 operating grant applications to the funded transitway counties. We still have that.
Yes, Madam Chair, committee members, the next two items are mine. They're actually a pair of items that we have here, 269 and 270. I'll talk about 269 first. This is for 2020 operating grant applications to the funding transitway counties. I'll take us back in time here. When we went for the funding for the light rail systems and the commuter rail systems, take costs, less fares, you come down to a subsidy. The subsidy then is split 50% state. Previously was 50% CTIP. When CTIP dissolved then in 2017, the CTIP responsibility then was then distributed to the counties at which the respective transitways ran. For example, Blue Line runs in Hennepin County. So the 50% CTIP subsidy then went to Hennepin County. Green Line ran in Hennepin County, basically 84% in Hennepin County, 16% in Ramsey County. So the CTIP responsibility went 84% to Hennepin, 16% to Ramsey. North Star was previously funded by CTIP and Greater Minnesota MnDOT and Sherburne County. Greater Minnesota MnDOT and Sherburne County was for the portion outside of the 7-county metro area. But the portion within it was previously CTIP. That is now broken down between Hennepin County and Anoka County. So what the action item number 269 is that the Metropolitan Council would authorize the regional administrator to apply for the 2020 grant agreements from the counties of Anoka, Hennepin, and Ramsey. You can see blue line would be for approximately $13.9 million, which would come from Hennepin. Metro Green line would be approximately $13.5 million, which would come from Hennepin and Ramsey. And then the North Star commuter rail would be approximately $7.8 million, which would come from Anoka and Hennepin. So this allows us then to apply for the grant agreements. Then during the month of later in October, we will be applying for the grant agreements. We will go through then a formal review with the counties. And then once the counties have approved it, we will then come back to the council, which will then allow us then to enter into, I'll bring a business item back requesting approval then to enter into these grant agreements. So this is right now is the application process. And with that, Chair, committee members, I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the presenter? All right, if not, then I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2019-269.
So moved.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes.
Okay, Chair, committee members, I will move on to item number 270. This is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate a subordinate funding agreement with the Sherburne County Regional Rail Authority for subsidy funding for the North Star commuter rail operations in 2020, approximately $1.5 million. So now this portion now is the same thing as what we just discussed, but this is for the portion outside of the 7-county metro. About 2 months ago, I brought forward an item that for recommendation of which was approved, so I could apply for the grant agreement with Greater Minnesota MnDOT for subsidy funding, about $1.5 million of funding from MnDOT for North Star. This is now the pairing it off now with the portion going to Sherburne County, the portion that's outside of Greater Minnesota for the $1.5 million. So it's the same as the other ones, but now it's allowing me to apply for the application with Sherburne County for the Greater Minnesota portion for North Star.
All right, any questions for Mr. Petrie? All right, if not, then I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2019-270.
Motion to approve?
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Next, we're on to business item 2019-280, North Star Vehicle Maintenance Facility Drop Table and Extra Track Contract. We have Tom McGannon. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jim Har with Metro Transit Engineering Facilities.
Tom McGannon with Engineering Facilities.
And we're here today to present this business item 2019-280, requesting council authorize award of an additional $875,000 in funding for construction contract with Sheehy Construction for the North Star Vehicle Maintenance Facility drop table and extra track. And I apologize, we thought we had a presentation linked here, so we're going to speak through this here, but we may be able to follow up with that later just as information. So.
All right, a little history on the project. The council approved the construction contract for the project and sent down an NTP June 21st of 2018 for $3.3 million. The contract is for construction of a new drop table pit, installation of a single axle drop table, and construction of additional maintenance track in the vehicle maintenance facility. Construction started in July of 2018 and is anticipated to finish up this winter. Currently, what we have is for a project need is a drop table will improve the safety and efficiency of removing axles and traction motors for maintenance. So what you have right now is a locomotive that is basically 11 by 63, so it's 6 times as long as it is wide. So you have something that's 132 tons like this, and you have 4 jacks that you have to jack it up in different ways, so it's not the safest. And then when you take down the axles, they're 5 tons each. So it's heavy loads that we're using on there. So what they do is they detach the train, put either the locomotive or the car up there. They jack it up, they lower the axles, and then put it back together. And a car or locomotive can be out of service roughly 3 days. That's on normal. So basically, what drop table is, it's a device that uses a railway engineering during maintenance jobs that require the removal of locomotives and rolling stock wheel sets. The machine is built on a drop pit, allowing locomotives or rolling stock to be rolled onto it, avoid the need for heavy cranes, jacks, and lifting the vehicles off the rails. So what it does is that the train comes in. I wish we had this, it'd show you really nice, but train comes in, it stays on the tracks. So what you do is you undo the axles, and that lowers it down, brings it over and up where a crane or a fork can take it out of there. Then it comes back and brings the axles up. So it's done. You can do it, within a day. So it saves 2 days of maintenance, but it's also a safety factor that you're not jacking the locomotive up, you're not detaching it, and it's widely used throughout the industry.
So as Tom mentioned before, we awarded the contract in 2018. Really, work started in earnest after shop drawings and that earlier this year. The biggest of being the excavation of the 17-foot plus or minus pit that's the size of the locomotive Tom referred to before in order to make those wheel sets, to provide that pit for those to be taken off. And we ran into several unforeseen conditions through that project and that process that have added to the cost and our need for this business item here. The first has been the soil conditions. Our soil borings showed fairly sandy soils through here. As they excavated and the drilling started, we ran into a lot of rock, a lot of boulders, a lot of things that required changes to the process that we had put into our design and that was put into the contract and the bid for those contractors to move forward. We also had some as-built information from the original construction that did not show all of the utilities, and we were running into utilities in that excavation that weren't originally anticipated, some of which had to be redesigned and rerun, including construction of a new pump station that's under construction right now in order to allow for meeting current codes. And then also, as all of these add up, schedule delays, as Tom mentioned, we're now going to be going into winter to finish up this construction. So the combination of those unforeseen conditions has been the bulk of what is why we're here, why we're requesting that additional $875,000 of contract authority. So with that, our proposed action here today is that the council authorize the original administrator to execute an amendment to construction contract 17P395 with Sheehy Construction Company in the amount of $875,000. With that, we can take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you, Chair. Just was wondering what happens during the 3 days. Is there like a backup train that does it, or do you go without the service, or you take the car off so there's just less capacity?
Well, Madam Chair, committee members, that is out of service. There are spares that they use, but there's minimum spares. So you don't want to have a locomotive or cars out of service for that long of time.
Okay, so you'll just substitute another vehicle for the 3 days for the one whether it's out of service then. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Zarin.
Madam Chair, I'd like to know when the core drills were done for the building, how many were done, and how was that information recorded?
So, Madam Chair and Councilmember, Tom can probably give the exact amount maybe of the soil borings that are completed, but anytime we're doing those investigations, you're poking holes. You could be missing an entire locomotive that's under those slabs. They're recorded in a soil boring report that is then provided as part of our bid documents to our contractor. So they base their work on that information, which is the best that we have available to us. We We work directly with our geotechnical engineers in terms of what is an appropriate amount of boring so they can develop those recommendations for be it the type of material used, or excuse me, equipment used for that excavation, or be it a foundation that's placed at the base of this pit. And it's pretty standard for any of our construction projects. So that's kind of how the process that was put in place, and that's the information that was provided to the contractor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just curious about the original construction estimate. Usually there's kind of a range before they bill us. So how was this extra 875,000? Was that close to the upper range of the original estimate, or how do we cushion for that, or request the contractors to cushion for overages?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, we don't, in terms of how this relates to our original estimate, I want to say our original estimate was actually a little lower than what their bid number was, if I remember correctly, when we brought this forward back in 2018. Council policy or procedure allows us a certain amount of change order authority that we build into our budgets. I believe it's up to 10%. This goes above and beyond that, which is why we're needing to amend the contract to allow for the additional funds.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? I have a question. So I think this gets to the question that Councilmember Zarin was bringing up earlier about the relationship between the budget line item, which says new North Star draft table project, and provides 150,000 in RTC funds, where this is amending the contract by the 875,000. Or is that because they're different sources, or what is the difference in the numbers?
Yeah, Madam Chair, that 150,000 would be a part of that 875,000. The rest of that is already in the project budget. We can, it was just, we had a gap. So we were bringing through that budget amendment process, that additional funding in to cover that gap to get us to the $875,000 need.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2019-280.
So moved.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the business item pass. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now for what goes on consent. So things that were on our consent agenda will go to direct consent to the full council. But I would propose that business items 2, 3, and 4 can all go on consent to the full council. Any different disagreements? All right, very good. So we'll do that. Now we are on to the information part of our meeting. So we have major highway projects update, and we have Tony Fisher here. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, council members. My name is Tony Fisher. I'm a highway planner in MTS, and I'm here to share some updates on specific projects, but then also cover a few issues that cross across projects. So just one slide on some projects you might see under construction currently in the Shakopee area, south of Shakopee actually. You might see 169 under construction. What they're doing there is converting an intersection at Highway 41 and County Road 78 to an interchange. And they are also approximately 2 miles south of there building an interchange at County Highway 14 is largely what they're accomplishing. That's a Scott County project. It should be wrapped up a year from now. Also in the South Metro 35W over the Minnesota River Bridge, a large project, $127 million, is replacing the river bridge. It'll be 2 bridges, one for northbound and southbound when they're done. They're also raising the roadway south of the bridge out of the floodplain. I don't know that that's ever closed for flooding, but it's been close, maybe individual lane closures, or to a point where the underneath the roadway has been in question. The stability of that has been in question because the water's risen so high. They'll also be adding a lane to northbound. There's currently a truck climbing lane that begins north of the bridge. And with this project, that lane will be extended south in the northbound direction, but it'll be extended south to the Cliff Road entrance. 35W at 94, also known as the Lake Street Project or Downtown to Crosstown, is a $239 million project. We'll be building the transit station for the Orange Line. We'll be replacing pavement, quite a number of bridges. We'll be making some improvements to the MinPass system in the northbound direction. We've had a shoulder lane being used for MinPass during peak periods, and that'll be more of a traditional design with shoulders for breakdowns. In the southbound direction, MinPass had been beginning at about 42nd Avenue. That will stretch all the way into downtown for southbound traffic leaving downtown Minneapolis. There's also some exit ramps in the Lake Street area, and with a project that large, there are a lot of little pieces to that too. And then another one in the North Metro, 35W North, we call it, between Highway 36 and Lexington Avenue in, I think, Blaine, is reconstructing the roadway and adding in-pass lane in the median. There used to be a ditch, and that'll be filled in with a barrier. And actually, they're not reconstructing the road. They're doing something we call an unbonded overlay. And so it's a technique where 8 or 10 inches of concrete is added to the top of the existing roadway. And the old roadway is really essentially used as a base, and it's a strategy that can achieve most of the benefits of a reconstruction at a fraction of the cost. So it's exciting to see MnDOT using that in a number of cases. And that still has a couple of years to go. So a few projects that will be under construction in the coming years. These are funded and defined at least a high level. 94 from St. Michael to Albertville will be reconstructed with added lanes. So it's currently 4 lanes. That will be 6 lanes when they're done with that project. That's $65 million and will be completed in a couple of years. Along that stretch, MnDOT's trying to do a lot of work along 94 to get in and get out, minimize those traffic impacts. So between Maple Grove and Rogers, again, MnDOT is applying that unbonded overlay technique where they're putting 8 or 10 inches of concrete on top of the existing roadway. As part of that, they are also adding lanes between 610 and 101. And then the city of Dayton is building an interchange in coordination with MnDOT's project. Just east of where Brockton Lane is an overpass, there'll be a new interchange at what's called Dayton Parkway. So altogether, those projects cost $162 million. You might have seen some initial work this summer, but the heavy construction in that area will start next year. In Anoka, the county is leading a project in the city of Anoka to build an interchange at the Thurston Avenue intersection. They will be converting the Fair Oak intersection to an underpass, so Fair Oak will travel under Highway 10 without access. They're also making improvements to the Main Street interchange and bike and ped connections, frontage road connections in that area. That's a project a little bit further out, $93 million. And then in Elk River, this was a Corps of Commerce project. Highway 169 just north of Highway 10, 3 miles will be reconstructed as a freeway. I believe there are 4 signalized intersections there that are planned to be 3 interchanges and an overpass when they're done. That's a little bit further out because MnDOT is waiting for the 94 projects to finish up before starting construction on Highway 10, given the parallel route nature of that and the way they can kind of take some of the traffic loads during construction. So here I'll slow down a little bit. This is just a highlight of a lot of the major projects that are still in development. Some of these are partially funded. This isn't a real precise list. 212 isn't on this list. That's another major project in the Southwest Metro. So there wasn't really a black and white line to draw here, but just to give you a sense of some things that are going on in the Metro here. So Highway 252-94 north of downtown Minneapolis stretches through North Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park. The vision for this project is to convert Highway 252 to a 6-lane freeway. The inside lanes could be MnPass lanes, and then extend those MnPass lanes south along 94. There'd be added lanes to Dowling, and they could be conversions south of Dowling in the long term, but that isn't part of the immediate vision for the project. What I'm describing is the Corps of Commerce definition of the project. You can imagine during project development, things change. Different agencies have different positions. So that's kind of conceptually what it is, but things could definitely change along the way. Where the decision making is at on that project is that there's general consensus on where the interchanges should be along that corridor. There are currently 6 signalized intersections. There will be 3 interchanges. Anticipate those to be at 66th Avenue, Brookdale Boulevard and 85th Avenue. And that seems to minimize costs for the corridor in terms of 3 interchanges, replacing 6 intersections. It really fits the travel patterns and serves the community hopefully well. The piece south of Dowling is part of the vision, and that's where I have a $40 million plus addition. That's not part of the Corridors of Commerce project. There's a vision to convert the lanes south of there because there are already 10 lanes. We wouldn't add lanes there, but we could convert the inside lanes and add direct connections into Minneapolis. This project could begin as early as 2023. It does have a large funding gap. There's Corridors of Commerce estimated $163 million about 18 months ago. That would come from $132 million from MnDOT, assume $31 million of local contribution due to MnDOT's cost participation policy. But current estimates are closer to double that. That's for a number of reasons. The right-of-way costs are quite a bit higher than anticipated. Part of that is due to the ponding requirements. When MnDOT predicts rainfall, they can build their drainage system to accommodate that rainfall. But as you're well aware, rainfall has been fluctuating more and increasing, and so new predictions of rainfall are increasing. And so MnDOT is struggling through that now with larger rainfalls. They need more space for ponding, larger pipes, and that's contributing to some of the cost increases. MnDOT's been doing engagement in a number of phases throughout this project to tackle some of the bigger issues where interchanges should be min-pass, if min-pass is the right answer there or not. This is a project that does have a policy advisory committee, and Councilmember Chambliss is part of that, and Councilmember Lilligren's been invited to that because of the impacts potentially in Minneapolis area, although most of them are north of that Dowling Boulevard area. So the other large project to really within the 7 counties of the metro from the Corridors of Commerce program is 494 Min-Pass and interchange work at 494 and 35W. Just because of proximity and because they are undergoing study together, I packaged those together here. Individually, Min-Pass was awarded $134 million to be constructed between France Avenue and Highway 77. And interchange improvements at 494 and 35W were funded at $70 million. Again, MnDOT's finding as they get into more details that the costs are higher than anticipated. The current estimate for the cost that was funded at $204 million is between $225 and $305 million. So potentially a large gap. There's also concerns that piece is really not workable from a perspective of if we spend 2 or 3 years reconstructing the highway, and it's not clear that the public would really recognize the benefits from that large, but really in terms of the problem, they're modest project. So the vision is estimated closer to $560 or $760 million. I don't want to say that the vision is needed right now. I think we commonly use a strategy of trying to build these projects in phases. And so that's definitely being looked at right now. How can you build towards that vision? But there's a lot of risk in that narrow Corridors of Commerce definition project. So there are alternatives being considered on both 252 and 494 of how to work within that budget or to draw other funds to the corridor. Everything from canceling other projects in the region to moving money between these 2 corridors if one's more workable than the other. Obviously, that comes at a significant cost to the corridor that doesn't get prioritized in that. Another case of MnDOT facing really substantial drainage problems. The first try at a drainage solution, there's been some flooding on the corridor, and again, anticipated growth in rainfall leads to additional needs for drainage structures. But the first try at that was looking at $200 million for a tunnel to the Minnesota River to drain a lot of that water off the corridor so that it wouldn't flood during heavy rainfalls. They've gone through a lot of evolutions. They're looking at a $50 million solution today. So that's great progress, but it's still a big chunk of the funding that's assigned to this corridor and needed to make this corridor work. MnDOT is going through a Min-Pass evaluation on this corridor, whether that's the right thing to do or whether it's a general purpose traditional lane, and I can talk through a little bit more about that on another slide. This will have a policy advisory committee with council members, local council members invited, starting at the end of this month. So Rethinking 94 has been going on for a while, and that has started the environmental process, the more formal environmental process this past summer, I believe. That has some modest funding. $100 million is not a small amount of money, but that's not certain, and the need really could be large next to that number. It's not clear what it's going to take to really do something on that corridor. There is planned preservation work, but not the large scale of reconstruction or unbonded overlay that's really called for on a project given the condition of the pavement bridges. 94 through this area sees mill and overlay where they take 4 inches of bituminous off the top, put 4 inches back on every 7 or 8 years here. And that's incredibly frequent. That's just not the kind of cycle. That's really a Band-Aid approach. And so there's a large unmet need for preservation in the corridor. MnDOT's been doing a lot of engagement through phase 1. Obviously, this is a special project. There's a history in this corridor. There was a lot of damage done to the Rondo community when this project was built. There wasn't that level of engagement. And I think MnDOT's been trying to make up for that with a lot of additional engagement, a lot of additional just thinking through the way transportation can serve people in the community instead of serving people through a community. So I think MnDOT's done a lot of that work, and the projects are yet to be defined to see how that can help the community in terms of connections or even aesthetic treatments on bridges. People who live close by might never drive on 94, but they might see the assets every day, and they're in pretty poor condition right now. So usually with these types of projects, we're trying to do that preservation work. We're looking for opportunities to improve mobility and safety. We've looked at in-pass option in the past, and we'll be looking at that again. Our transit services lost an advantage when the bridge collapsed in 2007, and so we're looking for opportunities to bring that transit advantage back to this corridor. And that does have a policy advisory committee that recently began meeting.
Councilmember Atlas, Senior Person.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for being late. Was in a prior meeting upstairs. I really appreciate the comments regarding Rondo. I'm also curious about the community in Minneapolis, North Minneapolis in particular. In 94 and St. Paul has pedestrian bridges, but 94 in Minneapolis doesn't have any pedestrian bridges. And I know at one point there had been conversations around a land bridge, and I'm just curious, is the conversation around historic inequities reserved for the St. Paul community, which is also very important, but is there also awareness and thinking around what the community that was disconnected in North Minneapolis in particular?
You know, I can tell you that the engagement phase 1, I believe, did try to engage a variety of communities in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and it was pretty extensive engagement. I think right now MnDOT is seeing this as a really too large of a project. When we think about Broadway Avenue all the way to Highway 61 in Minneapolis, I think it's 15 miles long, travels through so many neighborhoods, so many assets, and just different traffic patterns, and just almost too big to bite off. And so I think they're trying to focus it a little bit narrower. It could be as narrow as Hiawatha to Marion Avenue, so really between the downtowns, and not try to tackle that. But I think that's part of the current conversation is what is the right scope for this study and for the projects that come out of it. And it's not that wouldn't be addressed, but it's what would be addressed at this time, I think.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Do you know when we'll be getting some feedback on the engagement results, especially related to preservation, connectivity, and mobility?
So the way MnDOT is describing the study they're doing right now is really phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 1, we might have wrapped up as much as a year ago, and that was a large-scale engagement effort, involved even the commissioner out at meetings. The current work that's being done is more technical, so I have to believe that phase one part of the study does have a report. I'm not really familiar with what's in it, but it did cover that engagement.
Yeah, I believe we had a presentation on the at the end of that, and there was a report that was issued. I'm sure we could get links for it. Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, committee members, yes, we financially, as the council, help participate in that engagement and manage some of the engagement contracts, and that was wrapped up in a report and summary that we can share. One of the keys, they kind of divided up the corridor that you see on the map into different neighborhoods and had engagement targeted different types of engagements, and different needs were developed out of that report as well. I think it's a really good report looking at what's the condition of assets, what are the community values at the neighborhood level within that, what are their needs, and we're really trying to encourage that the next phase that we're in now use that information as they're developing the environmental phase. But there will be additional engagement in the environmental phase that is sort of starting to. So.
But given the scope of the project, as Tony was alluding to, it's a good document to go back and look at. And also, there was a great deal of engagement and was a good partnership with MnDOT. So I think it'd be, worthwhile to take a look at. Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. I would just add that I serve as the chair's alternate on rethinking I-94. And so at the September meeting, really the outcome of that was to do a deep dive on what we learned through the community engagement process. At our next meeting, it sounds like we're meeting quarterly, so not as often as I thought we would meet, but our next meeting will be that deep dive.
Again,
I just had kind of a question on the min-pass lanes, like what percentage of drivers use the lane, and then what percentage of the people are paying for it versus using the carpool function of,
Yeah, so we have 3 corridors operational for MnPass, and we have a number of them planned. In general, the number of vehicles is less in a MnPass lane. Let's say if 35W south of Minneapolis has seen 1,600 vehicles per hour, where the general purpose lanes could be ideally as high as 2,000 cars an hour. That isn't always the case. But when you look at the number of people that you're moving because of transit, because of high occupancy vehicles, you can be moving almost twice as many people in a MnPass lane.
Okay, all right, and it's more, so you see quite a few of carpool, like if you look at 5 cars going down, or 2 paying for it, and 3 are multi-occupancy or motorcycles using it.
Chair and committee members, most people aren't paying. Most people are high occupancy vehicles or riding in a bus, the vast majority.
All right, thank you.
any other questions? Right? Pausing. Okay, Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. One thing that came up at the Rethinking I-94 meeting, which I think is, I continue to hear the references to min-pass lanes, and one thing that came up at the meeting was this pushback in terms of, we call these managed lanes, and I think that, I don't know if that's a MnDOT position versus, but is there some clarity you could offer on MnDOT versus managed lanes?
Chair and committee members, so managed lane is a broader term. There are a number of ways to manage a lane. Before 2005, the Twin Cities had 2 high occupancy vehicle lanes. So transit had the same advantage, and HOVs, occupancy vehicles, had the same advantage, but there was no ability to pay into it. And so in that time, we converted them to high occupancy toll lanes that created that other option. There are truck lanes in other communities where there's a lot of freight, maybe going, in a corridor. So there are a lot of different ways to manage a lane. MnPass is the branding that we use to describe what's generically termed a high occupancy toll lane.
Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, and the position that MnDOT would like to use during the environmental phase, where you haven't settled on how a lane would be to call it a managed lane. But once it's open and is being branded as MnPass, and that's what it is, that's what is being called at that point. But in a phase like Rethink I-94, where they haven't decided what the alternatives are, the managed lane allows it to be more of a generic and allow even other options than just tolling. So that's with their preferred terminology during that kind of project development phase.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sterner.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just was wondering about the enforcement of MinPass, like how easy that is to do or not with technology in that, or is it pretty minimally enforced?
Chair and committee members, that is definitely a struggle. It's something that comes into even the design of the highway, whether we can provide a wide left shoulder for law enforcement to pull somebody over to the left or not. It's a really expensive thing to do, but otherwise, State Patrol has to pull somebody over across multiple lanes to the right. I didn't read the article, but I thought there was some new technology in the paper today, even that MnDOT's testing to help with that enforcement, but it's a constant challenge, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions right now? All right.
So 35W North Gateway is probably better described as a study than a project at this point. It started up last December, really staff involvement. Hasn't had a policy advisory committee yet, but that's anticipated before the end of the year. That covers the area between Highway 36 and downtown Minneapolis. Purpose and need is being developed right now, so that'll really set the framework for how to score ideas, different alternatives. Some of the issues that MnDOT's grappling with is the pavement is really aging, and MnDOT is saying that they need to be in reconstructing that pavement or doing some kind of long-term pavement fix. There are a lot of bridges in the area. It doesn't seem like that's quite the urgent need that the pavement is right now. And then north of Highway 36, you saw earlier, we'll be opening up in-pass lanes in, I believe, 2 years. And so there's some concern with southbound how that's going to end at Highway 36 and work. The current transportation policy plan does include this stretch for in-pass within the fiscally constrained plan. There aren't specific dollars, though, attached to that type of an improvement yet. Yeah. So another big study, Highway 65. This is a study through from Spring Lake Park to Ham Lake. It's a really busy signalized arterial corridor. It's some improvements recently, but at grade type improvements. This is a study that's really looking at a range of improvements from those types of small intersection at grade improvements to grade separated, more freeway-like type investments. They're working through alternatives right now, evaluating those. I don't believe they have any conclusions yet. But it is an area that we've prioritized when we did a study a few years ago that looked at intersections in the region. And if you were going to build interchanges, where could that make sense? And so this stretch has 8 out of approximately 30 that were kind of seen as high priority locations. And it's this is a study, not a project. There's really no funding attached to it. Highway 12 is unfortunately notable for the number of people that have died on that highway in recent years. It's been in the paper, it's gotten a lot of attention, and it does definitely stand out in terms of corridors. It's mostly a 2-lane rural highway. There's something called the Super 2 closer in east of Maple Plain. That's a pretty safe design. It looks like a freeway. There's no access, but that Super 2 is moving a lot of traffic, and west of there, it just really can't be accommodated on the rural design, and that's where you're seeing head-on crashes. Just if you make a mistake, there isn't any room for that mistake. So it's gotten MnDOT's attention. The legislature gave Hennepin County, I believe, $20 million in GEO-bonds towards improvements, and so they're doing a study to see what the right answer would be on that corridor. So back to MnPass, why do we prioritize MnPass over traditional general purpose lanes? So MnPass does some of the same things that an unmanaged lane would do. It can serve additional vehicles and thus reduce congestion, but it does more than that. And so because we can price the MnPass lane, we can adjust that price between 50 cents and $8. It really allows us to aim for a target of something close to free flow or reliable travel times, what people would expect to drive. Nothing's 100% guarantee when it starts to snow a lot, but generally these lanes are pretty well managed towards free flow conditions. So that really benefits us in terms of our transit service and encouraging high occupancy vehicle lanes. It provides that option for people that are willing to pay a toll. And that's really a long-term benefit because in a lot of cases, these are the last lanes we're building. And what we've seen is we build a lane and it fills up eventually. And so by being able to manage it, that gives us a lot more options too. Eventually, there's always talk about allowing electric vehicles in or automated vehicles in, or, whoever should be prioritized. And, this gives us the option to have that conversation over long term. In terms of equity, we think transit is a large benefit to a lot of low income and minority populations. We also see that even there's a cost and income can be a barrier for some people, that people of any income can be time sensitive, whether it's a daycare pickup or getting to a job on time that you're depending on. So we see this as serving the whole community and not just people that can pay for this every day. There's also freight benefits that we're recognizing. Freight vehicles under 26,000 pounds can use these lanes. When we study 494, there's actually 40 to 60% of the freight on that corridor is less than 26,000 pounds and would be in-pass eligible. If we think about the medical device community trying to get to the airport for a flight that's leaving at a certain time, we can imagine a lot of value there for a freight community. And then we like to remind people that these are really managed, part of the day. A lot of these are managed, 4 hours a day, 5 or 6 hours a day. So most of the day, 18, 20 hours a day, these are like any other lane. So the role that the council has in these types of projects, these regionally significant projects need to be included in the transportation policy plan, where we set the investment priorities for the region. They need to be included in the 4-year transportation improvement program. So every year we update a new tip, and that gets approved by you. The corridor policy advisory committees I've mentioned, and controlled access highway approvals come through the council. They usually show up here on the consent agenda, but there's a Minnesota statute that within the 7-county area gives the council jurisdiction over freeways that are built in the Twin Cities and major modifications to those freeways. So some studies that are on the horizon for us. We are trying to get our arms around the Twin Cities mobility needs over the next 20 years. When MnDOT develops their state highway investment plan, they have pavement models and bridge models, and for a certain level of investment, they are very able to understand what the output is, what kind of bridge condition they'll be faced with, what kind of pavement condition they can achieve with different investment levels. We don't have that same ability when it comes to congestion and delay. And so with this study, the council will be undertaking a task to create some data points. What would it cost to maintain congestion where it is today? What might it cost to bend that curve downwards? These might be financially unplausible numbers, but we should know what they are. And this will help in that balance with their pavement and bridge needs by having this data. Corridor studies, Highway 13 and Savage has been studied over and over again. It's seen a number of improvements and therefore a number of changes. And so there's another study in the Savage area. Scott County is developing a Dakota Avenue interchange project at the same time. And then I mentioned the Highway 65 study north of County Road 10. MnDOT is working towards a study that would look at south of there down to the Mississippi River, and also look at the parallel route of Highway 47. There was a road safety audit, I believe, in the Spring Lake Park area of these roads, and kind of started to look at the pedestrian issues. There are a few people that have died out there, and it's really doesn't seem to fit in the community. It's designed for pretty high speeds, but there is also a draw of pedestrian traffic across the highway, so those conflict. And so MnDOT's looking at a broader study for that corridor, try and deal with some of those things. Highway 20 has been a turn-back conversation, and I think it's fair to say we'd like to turn that back to the counties. And so this study will look at developing some improvements that could aid in that conversation. another corridor that's lacking severely in pedestrian and potentially bike facilities. And then MnDOT and Dakota County will be partnering on a study of 35W and I-35 from Cliff Road down to County Road 50. I believe the county has an interest in the interchange at County Road 50 and considering in-pass extension in that area. And the council will be undertaking a vehicle electrification study. We want to understand better what the council's role could be, what the needs are to make that more plausible for more people and help reduce greenhouse gases. So a little bit on funding. This was from the 2018 update of the transportation policy plan. You can see 81% of MnDOT's money really goes to maintaining and operating the highway system. Safety is showing at 1%. That really doesn't do justice to what MnDOT's doing. Really, safety is incorporated into a lot of projects that they're doing, and this represents kind of the standalone safety projects. Regional mobility is 13% at $2.1 billion. That looks like a lot of money. It's a bit misleading, but I'll save that for the next slide. And then multimodal again is freight, bike, and pet improvements. But like safety, this is really narrowly defined as standalone projects and doesn't consider all the other things that MnDOT does on a normal pavement or bridge project. So let's see here. So this is MnDOT's funding outlook for the period of our transportation policy plan, 2015 to 2040. And there's a number of lines, horizontal lines here. That top thicker line represents a historical target that MnDOT had to spend 43% of the state highway money in the metro area. And then if you look at that first red line, recent history has been above 40%, but not at the 43% number. The tip at the time we were developing the TPP, the 4-year tip, was probably closer to that 43%. But if you look at the planning horizon, there's 2 time frames shown. The purple dots are the next 6 years. So it's what MnDOT calls their capital highway improvement program minus the tip. So this is really where projects are being developed. But you can see how we're starting to fall below the 40% target. And in the out years, the last 10 years of MnDOT State Highway Investment Plan, we're falling down to 30% of the state's assets. And keep in mind, 56% of the population lives in the Twin Cities. 94% of the state's population growth is coming to the Twin Cities. We're faced with congestion today and in the future in a way that nobody else is in Minnesota. Besides the economic value of the Twin Cities to the state of Minnesota.
Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. Why 43%?
Chair and committee members, that is a historical question that I wasn't around with. I believe it was negotiated. There's always pulls on MnDOT's resources, and I think it was recognized that Greater Minnesota has a lot more miles and a lot more bridges to maintain, but Metro has different things to deal with in terms of population density. So as I mentioned, there's $2.1 billion set aside or planned for mobility over the 25 years that the plan covers. But the story is more complicated. When we were developing the transportation policy plan, mobility money was anticipated to run out after 2023. So really no money for MnPass, for interchanges, for a lot of the large projects from MnDOT. There's obviously other sources, regional solicitation, local funds, but MnDOT sources were going to dry up in 2023. As we developed a transportation policy plan that 2023 timeframe really became closer to us than it had ever been before, and we had conversations with MnDOT, and they were able to do a couple things to adjust. They were able to move $150 million from statewide pavement to metro mobility, so that extended, that gave us $50 million a year for 2024, 25, and 26. And they were also able, I believe it was through the 17 new money from the legislature, they were able to find a revenue stream of $20 to $30 million that could help with smaller improvements. That would include helping a county develop a project on a MnDOT trunk highway. it would include small intersection improvements, and that was a more permanent stream. So these, the lines you see reflect those improvements in our funding picture. They clearly didn't solve the problem, but I think they put it off a few more years. MnDOT will be developing a new state highway investment plan. You saw our mobility needs analysis where we're trying to provide information and input into that. So that's where kind of MnDOT's funding is. Yeah, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
All right, any additional questions? Councilmember Sterner?
Great, thank you, Chair and Mr. Fisher. I just had a couple in-between questions here. So one is the studies that are coming up. What's the timetable on most of those studies, especially like the MnDOT corridor studies, like in SAF 235? Are those like in the works now with the next 48 months?
So the Twin Cities Mobility Needs Study is something that we're leading, and we're hoping to start right away in January. MnDOT's corridor study, so Highway 13, if I'm not mistaken, Highway 13 might even be underway. I'm not really sure.
Director Thompson?
I think that one is about to start or will be soon.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And Chair and committee members, the next two studies, Highway 6547 and Highway 120, are really still being framed up as to what the studies need to cover. So those could be a little bit further down the road. And I believe the 35W35 study would fit in that time frame. Vehicle electrification is our study, so it's really up to us how quick we can get things going.
Thank you,
Councilmember
Chair.
Sterner?
Then I just had one from earlier on where we talked about the 494-35W, about add the min pass lane and so on. What I'm kind of wondering is we have the orange line coming through and we've got the southwest transit coming in. Will that, you think, take some of the pressure off, or maybe it'll make this a moot point? It's a lot of money for this one, and we already have two projects going with transit. I just was wondering if you had an opinion on that, if it may make this not needed plans there.
Chair and committee members, so Orange Line is really perpendicular to this route, so I don't think they're going to have a lot of overlap, and Southwest is really at that diagonal.
Okay.
So my estimation is that there isn't a lot of overlap in the markets.
Okay, so it's going to be different.
And I will just say, as someone who frequents the 494 corridor quite often, there's actually very limited transit on that corridor because it is so congested. And so actually moving people into shared mobility options like transit would be probably highly beneficial along that corridor, which would work with min passes, either whether it's carpool or someone who wants to pay or transit. So additional questions? Councilmember Atlas and Critson.
This has always been an exchange, or that section that has really behooved me, and I'm curious, are we thinking about using streetlight to kind of understand I imagine that it's just a cacophony of all kinds of trips, just because there's no rhyme or reason any time of day. It's just having worked at the southern terminus of that, or western terminus of that route. But I'm curious, are we planning to use some of streetlight to understand where those trips are, what's creating that issue? Because then that would lead us to what would be alignments that might be beneficial.
Which one of you wants to take it?
Council members, yes, we are using streetlight on as much as we can for looking at what's happening today. We also need to use our council's model to think to the future. Streetlight isn't too good at forecasting, or it doesn't forecast in 2040. But the combination of those, truly understanding where people are coming from, I think, is streetlight that drives home the point. On 494, I think on any given day, there's a trip from every single county in Minnesota. So streetlight has helped us talk about this project is not a metro project. This is a Minnesota project. And it's allowed us to talk about that in a way that we haven't been able to before. And then it will help you really understand at the project level as you're trying to make decisions what the impacts would be based on where people are coming and going from. It's a tool that I think we're using more and more, and it's just opened up all kinds of analysis for better decision making.
Great, thank you.
Additional questions? I just want to, if you want to flip to your last slide one more time. I'm just going to recommend that all of you print this out and carry it with you and talk about this often because it really, really highlights the need for transportation funding. It's something that we definitely see, and we know that it makes it hard for us to plan when we know those numbers aren't there. So, yeah, I'm happy to print out copies for everyone.
Madam Chair, the way to think about it is, if we were at just the historical level of 43%, several more major projects would be built in the metro area. And there's a definite recognition that it should not be a majority in the metro because there's just so many more miles of pavement bridge in Minnesota. But this decline is basically meaning is the mobility needs in the Twin Cities won't be addressed unless we can get closer to that. But it's multiple projects that are far gone.
Councilmember Freisand.
Thank you, Chair. And on that note, I would just, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but there are 2 or 3 revenue sources that are dedicated to funding transportation. I think that's important for folks to understand in the conversations they're having with the people. So whether it's the gas tax or license tab fees, but our options on the table are pretty limited as it relates to guaranteeing that future new revenue would be dedicated to fix this problem. So, I interact with a fair amount of folks that say, oh, we got to fix the roads, we got to fix the bridges. They don't want to pay the gas tax or increase gas tax. Can't have it both ways.
With that, any other questions? Nope, I think we're good. Thank you. And with that, that's the last item on our agenda, and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
For
Second.
a second. Adjourn.